start. We start at 9:30, so we actually 15 minutes early. Ready? This house is in session. On yesterday's date, we were debating the Appropriation Bill 2026. We returned to the Appropriation Bill 2026. Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 67-3 to permit extended time for discussion on this head.
The question is that 67-3 of the Standing Orders be suspended. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Standing Order 67-3 is hereby suspended. The debate continues. You go move there. On yesterday's date, this honorable chamber was in Standing Finance Committee. We revert to Standing Finance Committee.
This Honourable House is now in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for St. James North. Honourable Member, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I now seek your leave and permission to call members of the Ministry of Education Transformation again.
Permission granted. Let me remind ministry staff as well as members of parliament of the process. I think the members of parliament will be very familiar. So I'll say to the members of the staff of the ministry, just remember when you are, just before you speak, just give your name and your position within the ministry, and you are allowed 3 minutes in your response. The minister would have 5 minutes in his response, and he has the right to refer or to defer to a member of staff. Honorable members of the House, you have 3 minutes to pose your question. You utilize your 3 minutes in preamble, but then you will forfeit actually asking the question. Once you've asked that question, you will be allowed 3 follow-up questions, 3 connected questions to the question you would have asked at first. If they're not connecting questions, you will be advised so, and I will move on to the next person in the interest of moving along quickly with this debate. Just remember your 3 questions must be connected to the first question. Thank you, Honorable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, let me commend the ministry for the work that it continues to do to strengthen the education system here, and to commend the minister for the work that he and his team continue to press on with. My question relates to the Foundation for Learning. I do know that the ministry has made it a priority to strengthen foundational aspects of learning, and that early childhood education is one of the areas of focus, and that being able to ensure that basic education is an important part of how we prepare our students to be better learners and to be more successful in the system. My question is, there was discussion about universal pre-primary that would certainly ensure that the foundational aspects of learning are inculcated at a very early stage, and that access for more young people would in fact be available in the early childhood stages. What are the current plans for the rollout of universal pre-primary?
Thank you, Honourable Member. You're right in the point that the ministry certainly will be rolling out the access to early childhood education. As a matter of fact, I'm pleased to report that this coming September, we're now in a position to ensure that that is done, giving access to all parents across the country who want to access early childhood education for their children. They will now be in a position to do so. This, of course, is a very proud moment for the ministry. A lot of that work, incidentally, Honourable Member, would have started when you were in that chair. So let me also use the occasion to thank you for the work that you would have done in getting us here. But I'd also like to invite Dr. Christina Morris to also treat to a number of things in terms of the rollout, and also walking the country through how it is intended to work and the next steps.
Thank you, Minister. Pleasant good morning to all. Thank you, Honorable Member, for your question. I am Christina Morris, Senior Education Officer, Nursery and Primary Section. And yes, we at the Ministry of Education are offering access to all 3- and 4-year-olds to be enrolled in our schools. And in this regard, we encourage all parents to register their children with us so that they can access quality early childhood learning. And the question may be asked, how do we plan to do this? We have identified, based on data available, that there is a possibility that 2,032 children who will reach the age of 3 by September 1st, that their parents could very well be seeking access and enrollment. We have access and we have assessed our spaces available in our nursery and primary schools. To date, we have confirmed 1,711 spaces. Assessments are continuing as we speak, and we expect that by Friday of this week to have additional data coming out of the reports from our education officers who are in the field. What else have we done, and what else do we have to offer? We have taken a look at our human resources. We value and continue to value the work that our teachers have been doing, and we continue to prepare them for what we would like them to do as it relates to ensuring that we continue to strengthen our delivery of quality early childhood education. In this regard, we have targeted our early childhood coordinators who have responsibility for working with their principals to lead and build out early childhood pedagogy. The first cohort of training started in November, and we are continuing with that training from tomorrow. 79 early childhood coordinators are being exposed to the training. Additionally, with the assistance of our technical management unit, we have determined that some minor upgrades will be needed to some of our spaces in our schools, and in that regard, we will have, as necessary, some upgrades to bathroom facilities to ensure that we have the requisite number and type of toilets for our very young ones. We're also looking at our outdoor play spaces, and we do intend and will be working to build out those outdoor spaces as we provide equipment that is appropriate for our very young ones to build on their motor skills. And as you know, while they are doing that, it provides ample opportunity for them to strengthen their social and emotional skills as well as they negotiate with each other and as they engage in play. We intend by the end of this week, we have, as I look at human resources again, we have identified our 421 teachers with the requisite qualifications, and we are continuing to collect data on this. We have our teacher interest survey, which will be disseminated by Friday of this week. Upon approval, we have also prepared a parent interest survey because we want to hear from the parents. We want to know what they expect from us as educators, as we say to them, bring your children, enroll your children. That survey for parents has also been designed and will be disseminated by the end of this week upon approval. We intend to build out our early childhood education spaces. We intend to make them modern. We intend to make them aesthetically pleasing, and in that regard, we will build out those spaces with modern, colorful, appropriate equipment and the furniture to meet the needs of our 3-year-olds. Additionally, We also seek to ensure that by doing these, we create environments which are welcoming, safe, developmentally appropriate, where all of our children can thrive and where they can be readied for formal education. By July 31st, 2026, we expect to have our furniture distributed to the various schools. And we also expect that the minor upgrades, which would include sinks, what I commonly refer to as the mini toilets, and any painting. We also have identified spaces for our sand and water play, and we expect that these things will be done by July 30th, 2026, as we prepare for the start of the next academic year. As we prepare to roll out this initiative, we intend to go to public. We are doing this now in this forum, but I know that our communications team, they have also prepared a public relations campaign, which we intend to roll out shortly upon approval, and we are going to take our message to parents. We are ready. We have the access. We have a cadre of trained, qualified teachers in early childhood education. We will make all of our spaces ready, modern, relevant, and we are ready to accept those children who will be 3 years of age by the 1st of September, 2026. Additionally, as part of our outreach and to let parents know.
Officer, I know this is a very important subject that persons would like to hear and that you would like, I know, to expound on. However, your time has expired and you can come back later to share this important information with the public.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, my follow-up question. Now, recognizing that certain spaces have to be built out to be fit for purpose for the younger ones, my question to you is, which schools are going to be the schools that will receive, or will it be every single school will be able to receive the 3-year-olds? Or will there be only specific schools, and can you identify at this time which schools there will be?
Thank you for your question, Honorable Minister. At this time, I'm unable to provide you with a specific list, but I want to say to you that all 12 of our nursery schools, the majority of our primary schools, which currently have nursery units, as well as some of our primary schools which do not currently have nursery units, but which we have determined has the capacity. Because as we would have noted in our discussions yesterday, we noted that there has been a decline in birth rates and as a result, enrollment rates, and therefore we have determined that we do have the space to accommodate the numbers projected.
Chair, through you, to the honourable member, let me also assure Parliament and the country that we're in the process of refining the list so that the country will be very clear as to, let me repeat that. I'm saying that we're in the process, of course, of refining that list. And I want to assure Parliament and the country that once that is done in very short order, that the public will be made aware as to what that will be and what it will look like. But permit me, through your indulgence, Chair, to ask Dr. Morris, in her previous response, just to very briefly walk the Parliament and the country through the why of early childhood education. And why is this? Why am I asking for that to be done? The science has shown that between the ages of 3 and 5, once you can get a child's mind into a mode of learning certain key skills and understanding, that will go on to benefit them for the rest of their life. And what they learn thereafter, as we would say in Barbados, of course, is gravy. But that foundational element is so key that what we're trying to now do is to ensure that every child, even before they get into the primary school system, as it were, is that they have a global head start. These things, of course, are happening across the world. When you look at jurisdictions like China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Rwanda, a number of them, UAE, and you then see the benefits, particularly over the next 15 years of these countries' development. It is as a result of that strategic deliberate policy intervention. So I just wanted very briefly for Dr. Morris to be given the time to just walk the country through the importance of it and the science and why now at this time as part of transformation.
Thank you, Minister. And you're quite right. Yes, there is a large body of research out there which informs us that during the early years of a child's development, there is a lot of learning that takes place. And therefore, it is incumbent on us as educators to maximize on that period of the child's development, to create those learning spaces that will stimulate interest, that will stimulate inquiry, that will help them to strengthen their social and emotional skills. And we're not forgetting the values as they engage in their play. And this is another component of the program. We are insisting that the play-based approach is utilized by all of our teachers in early childhood, and as children engage in their play under being facilitated by their teachers, again, many opportunities will be provided for them to learn the values which we discussed yesterday, and for them to grow and develop all of those critical skills that are needed, not only to prepare them for formal school, but to prepare them for life. The play-based experiences will be grounded in our early childhood education curriculum, and this curriculum will be delivered by trained, qualified early childhood teachers.
Thank you, Chair. And my third and final question connects to the good news that you shared about the fact that you will have a public education campaign that will outreach to parents to update parents on what is available, where it's available, and how do you access. One of the things you said was that you're going to take your message to parents. My question is, at the same time that you're taking your message to parents, I am assuming that is going to be at the community level, where in various communities, people can come to hear how do you register your child. My question is, will there also be a decentralization of the registration to make it easier for parents? Are we going to ask all the parents to go to the ministry, or when we have those public education sessions, will you be able to show up and register on the spot? And I'm asking that on behalf of the parents and guardians of St. Philip West and indeed the rest of the country.
Yes, Honourable Member. Yes, thank you for that question. And again, I can say yes to your questions. The intention is to meet the parents in the communities. We will be setting up and organizing our town hall sessions across the country to let parents know which schools are available for them to register the children. We will have registration forms available, and we will be there to walk them through, to have discussions with them as we prepare for the registration for the start of the next academic year. So we will not have thousands of parents coming to the Ministry of Education. We will be going to them. We will also be enlisting the assistance of our school leaders in this regard, and they will also be facilitating the registration process.
Thank you, Chairman. I just hope that in advance of these sessions, you'll tell people if they need to bring a birth certificate, if they need to bring, so that when they come to these sessions, they're ready for registration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by thanking the Minister and his team for a very enlightening presentation so far on the concept of educational transformation. I would like to think that we would all believe that our system of educating our youth in Barbados lies really at the core of who we are as a people. Great social advances that we have made as a country has been laid on the basis of the social settlement, which the education system plays a large part. So I was very grateful for the Minister and his team outlining a lot of the vision for that transformation process. I understand from Minister's comments that there is the plans to establish an inspectorate in the school system, which will function to facilitate the monitoring, evaluation of the rollout of the curriculum and the school's programs, and also to do the counseling and coaching that is necessary from the central ministry to assist with public schools, and indeed in private schools as well. At present, the education officers fill that role. I'm aware that in the prior regrading exercise around the early 2000s, the regrading exercise did not adequately take into consideration the role of the education officers, to the extent that they were now regraded downwards below the rank of a principal. The very principal whom they are expected to supervise, monitor, evaluate. Indeed, education officers do make the recommendations for the appointment of principals at the public primary schools. So that it was an unfortunate occurrence where the metrics in the evaluation for the regrading place principals above the education officers who were themselves to supervise. And I am aware of instances where some principals were less than cooperative with education officers because they rank higher in the grading in the public service, and only the deputy and the chief would be senior. So I want to hear a little bit more of how that inspectorate will be rolled out. I know the minister has big plans and the ministry has been working on that. And I just want to hear a little bit more about that. I know there's a current regrading going on in the public service, and what efforts have been made to address those anomalies, which are not the fault of the Ministry of Education, but by way of the metrics used by the public service in determining that perhaps education officers were not in control of a large budget, and therefore, or as large as a budget as a principal. as one of the key metrics in determining the ranking in the public service.
Thank you for your question, Honourable Member. You spoke about an inspectorate that will quality assure the education system. But we are moving away from that term because it's very colonial. So what we are focusing on is the development of a quality assurance framework where we will be analyzing the entire system. We'll be looking at the roles and responsibilities of persons within the system, and we will be co-creating standards that will help us to measure when we have a good teacher, a good school, a good principal, a good education officer, a good chief education officer, all of the positions within the system. And I'm happy to report that just about 2 weeks ago, we had an exercise with our education officers, master teachers, and peripatetic teachers, as well as with the principals to determine the standards for good teachers, good teaching, good leadership, what is a good curriculum. So when I spoke about co-creating, it is truly a co-creation where we sit together and we share with one another, of course with the facilitator, to come to a shared understanding of what these particular positions should be doing and what the indicators will be to measure. These meetings will continue over the course of the next 5 months, and we will be looking to start the first cycle around October, where we will be going into schools, and we call this a bit of a pilot, where we will be going into schools, the education officers, master teachers, PTs, accompanied by some principals, and testing the particular indicators. And then after that, we will look at our results and refine. But what we are seeking to do is to have a proper, solid, strong, quality assurance framework by 2028. So this process will indeed take some time. You also spoke about the regrading exercise that occurred I think over a decade ago, where the principals are now at a higher grade than the education officers. And of course, that was an unfortunate circumstance, but I'm also happy to report that just about 2 years ago, the Ministry of the Public Service embarked on a regrading exercise where the education officers, deputies, the chief education officers, and other persons within the public service were able to submit their roles and responsibilities for consideration regrading. So we're awaiting, of course, the outcome of that. But in the meantime, you mentioned also that there are some principals who give education officers trouble. And I recognize that, of course, through reports from a few of my education officers. But as I always share with them, the Education Act speaks to the role of the Chief Education Officer. And I always tell my team that whenever the education officers go out, they represent the Chief Education Officer, or they go in the name of the Chief Education Officer. And as a result of that, they should receive the full respect. And if they do not, of course, the Chief Education Officer herself or himself will step in. All right, so we are seeking to resolve that. But I will tell you that over the last 2 years, the issue with principals not complying has not really been an issue because the principals understand as well the roles of the education officers and master teachers and PTs, and those roles are roles to come in and help them, to improve their school environment.
Thank you, Chief Education Officer. I was very heartened to hear about the concept of the co-creation or co-creating those roles and responsibilities between the principals and your team. And it seems to me that you're moving very swiftly in terms of not seeing officers in the service based on their ranking, which, as you may agree, will be more a colonial concept or concept of the past, but you're all partners in educating. Just another question that I have, and I have one more after this. One of the things that concerns me is the level of...
Honorable member, is this a follow-up to the first question? If it's a new question, then we have to move to the next person. So please indicate only follow-up questions with this one. Then you will get the opportunity to come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me for my ignorance, but I will pass on. The question is completely different, so.
Honorable member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to the Minister and the team. Minister, I was reviewing the estimates, and I noted a number of references to things related to digital technology. Under subprogram 302, the Education Sector Enhancement Program, I think it was supposed to be, but when I read the actual fine print, you may want to relook at that. But the bigger point is, when you look at your estimates, together with allocations for servers, network upgrades, software acquisition, digital learning infrastructure, all across the school system, it is clear to me that the ministry is banking a lot on the digital technology and digital revolution. I heard the chief say yesterday that we are not at the point yet where we are at capacity, or we're not at that point where it's too much. And I take that point. But I want to know, to what extent are we really measuring the returns of these digital interventions, and whether these investments are translating into improved teaching delivery, which I think perhaps is the point, the digital competency of the students, and how are we in real terms measuring the learning outcomes, which I believe ultimately is the point. So how are we equating and relating these digital interventions to real life progress? And I suspect, as I did yesterday, my question is also tied, this is in the school, but my question is also tied to the idea of real life. You know, to what extent are these interventions preparing Barbadian students for the real world? Now, I've seen, even in my own small little interventions where I ran some community-based programs, the provision of a device does not equate directly to one's learning in that space. Students play with them, students ignore them, and so on. So I'm just wondering, what are the tools that you use to measure, and what is that measurement telling you in relation to this digital intervention that, based on the estimates, because there's substantial money is being placed there, what are you seeing?
Thank you, Honourable Member, Senior Minister. So the process of ensuring that, one, as you asked, that we can prepare our people for, I can't even call it just the future, the present and the future, with respect to being able to navigate technology and to give them the necessary tools to navigate development even beyond school. That is why you would see, and would have seen in previous estimates, the rolling out of a comprehensive program so as to allow for our schools, including, of course, our teachers and our students, to be able to do learning and to learn in a mode of technology. As you would have heard yesterday, at the same time, I've instructed the ministry through our research and planning department to look also at the balance of how do we ensure that we're not going too far east in the use of that technology. Equally, as the chief would have indicated, we've not come to a place where there's an over-reliance, because there's still a major gap to fill. That notwithstanding, however, we've made it very clear that the learning outcomes must be matched with the investment we're making. And so far, I'm happy to report to you and to Parliament and to the country that we're seeing significant progress in that regard. We only need to take a step back to just 6 years ago, where we had to go through COVID, and almost immediately the country and many countries around the world had to be in a position to transition because of the pandemic. But it's not just because of those types of external shocks that we have to prepare our students. Most of the jobs that we currently have today in the world, and there was an ILO report, I wish I can have it here now, but when I was at the ILO, there was a report which indicated that the skills necessary for the next 20, 30 years of the global workforce will require a significant shift, not just in terms of curriculum, but in terms of the actual tools of learning and everything, and therefore technology is a key part of that. But the fourth and important point, however, is that the ministry is now in a mode of looking at all of our interventions to ensure that we have a better quality of outcome of learning, and how is that being addressed with respect to the outcomes that we want in terms of grades, in terms of confidence, in terms of all the outcomes that we would outline yesterday, for example, that must be part and parcel of the transformation. Now, what I want to do is to invite the chief and her team to give you some specifics with respect to numbers and data, so as to walk you through why the intervention is necessary, and therefore to be able to support the resources that we're asking Parliament to approve under the estimates.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, Senior Minister, I understand your concern with regard to the over-reliance, as you were speaking about yesterday, on the technology when, of course, teachers are engaging in instruction. But one of the things that we have focused on, especially over the past 2 to 3 years, is using data to drive our decision-making process. There are schools at present which use technology. They have classes where they use technology to aid instruction. We call it computer-aided instruction because the computers are supposed to assist and not take away from, or the tablets are supposed to assist or not take away from. I can give a specific example of Sela Primary, where they have classes that engage in the use of tablets. We call them Learn It tablets. And these children learn how to read using the tablets. They learn to do mathematics using the tablets as well, and some other things. And they have shown significant improvement in, these are the students, in their performance after use of the tablets. So while the ministry is on a mission to collect data using its quality assurance frameworks and using the officers from the planning and research department, our teachers are every day on the ground collecting information and sharing the success stories with the Ministry of Education. And very soon, you're going to see a lot more Learn It tablets within the education system, because we recognize that at least one school, and I only mentioned Sela, there are other schools that are using the Learn It tablets as well, but this intervention is really helping our children to achieve what we want them to achieve.
If I can, through you, Chair, to the Honourable Member, one of the other things that we have to face as well is the fact that, take CXC, for example. A lot of the examinations now through the CXC across the region have now moved into a mode of doing it online. And thus it forces our reality to be one where we have to prepare our children to take exams in that digital world. But it goes back to your earlier point of preparation for the world itself. Take, for example, in cabinet, we now use devices to engage in the business of cabinet, whereas traditionally it would have been paper. And more in the world, modes of business and business conduct and governance is done like that. So if we're going to prepare our students for that reality, which already exists, we have to give them the tools, whilst whilst being cognizant, of course, of the fact that there's still cognitive behaviors and everything that we still must ensure that they can master through ensuring that there's not that over-reliance. So hence the reason why we said yesterday that we've instructed the research team to now do the necessary research to ensure what is the balance that is suitable for Barbados' transformation at this point in time.
Chair, may I continue? So my follow-up question is this, more specifically then. During COVID, when we definitely had to rely on digital technologies for delivering education, there were many gaps that became apparent. Those gaps some were realized in terms of people's access to devices, people's access to internet. That's one of the things the government did was to try to provide internet services to the vulnerable households so that they could continue schooling. Students' capacity even to engage with that information, our readiness to be able to be educated via those changing modalities. COVID brought the reality to bear on a number of things. I would want to know to what extent are we able then to continue to be able to address and fill those gaps that COVID showed us. One, in terms of access and capacity to learn, but I think more importantly, if we realize that COVID became a point where the disparities perhaps had exponential negative impacts on students who did not have or could not learn, what have we put in place to be able to help those students catch up on the COVID years in simple terms? And I think it's an important question because I don't know if the country has actually appreciated the impact on COVID on people, period. And so for children whose learning, whose mental well-being, whose everything really depended on us being able to help carry them through a very difficult period, have we gone on with business as usual? Or to what extent have we, recognizing those disparities, to what extent have we been able to intervene through education to console, comfort, but yet build back the capacity of the students, and then to teach in a way that recognizes those disparities are real?
Thank you for the question, Senior Minister. The COVID period was a very difficult time for us. Indeed, we recognize that there were several children who did not have computers, they didn't have internet, as you correctly stated, and that, of course, widened the gap when it came to learning. What we did during that period was to ensure that those children received computers, and we had several meetings with service providers relative to internet provision for those children. In some cases, we engaged the Barbados Light and Power because some of the children's homes did not have electricity either. And all of those entities were very understanding and assisted us in ensuring that the learning gap, that digital divide, was not as great as it could have been. And as a ministry, we are very grateful to them. Fast forwarding to 2025, 2026, what we are embarking on as a ministry is the provision of digital devices to every child in Barbados. But we are doing it using a phased approach. So as of January 2026, it's my understanding that children in the first form received devices to facilitate what we call book fusion, that is the online textbooks. And we want to expand this so that we have children in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th also receiving those digital devices and then moving on at the primary level. So the ministry, in terms of hardware, is ensuring that our children have the hardware. Additionally, coming out of COVID, and I'm not sure if many persons know some of the measures that we took. We provided free lessons online for primary school children. Those who were about to write the examination, class 3 and class 4 children, teachers jumped on board and assisted with the provision of those free lessons, and it was a ministry effort. We also provided extra tuition online for secondary school children. That occurred as well. So there are a number of programs that we as a ministry put in place to close that learning gap that would have been created through COVID. Additionally, every summer, we have a program to help those children who have deferred. And I'm just talking about ministry programs now, those children who have deferred. But the real thing that I want to get to here is that we have several teachers across the system who are very invested in their children. They recognize the gap and they go beyond the call of duty to make sure that those gaps are closed. And I commend them for that. They do not depend on the ministry to say, do this, or do Y, do X, or do Y, to assist little John or little Ian or whoever. They put programs in place. They say sometimes after school, they give the additional instruction at lunchtime to make sure that gaps are closed. So the teachers, the principals, in terms of their school improvement plans, the ministry, in terms of their national programs, we are all working together to make sure that that gap with regard to learning is being closed.
My final follow-up. So, in the ministry I led in people empowerment, during COVID, we saw an increase in abuse cases for children and also domestic abuse. We saw neglect cases go up. I know COVID is over in the minds of people. I do not think it is over in the experience of children. And I really don't think it's over in the experience of the population. And so my question is twofold. My follow-up question is really a twofold question, and it's still in the digital space. I would like to know what the ministry, in terms of the impact on COVID on the children during that period, what have we done? And perhaps it's a question also to involve the psychologists, but to what extent have we been able to help the children cope with being out of school for 2 years? There are a number of things associated with that. If you live in an unstable household, or if you are a child who benefit from being in groups, I don't know that you can just go back to business as usual. So I just want to know, and that would be an impact on all the children in schools, but particularly at the primary schools, those who were 4 during COVID, 5 during COVID, 6, 7, 8 during COVID, and whose learning was significantly impacted, one. But then, considering that we could have another COVID or some other pandemic, how have we built the digital resilience of the Ministry of Education and the children? And I think I hear, because we've started doing more, to what extent have we been able to build that digital resilience to recognize that in the event that it happens again, we are better able to deal with it? And again, I really want to thank the Ministry of Education, because I know y'all did a lot of work with the children during COVID to make sure children had access to learning and so on and so forth. But we live in a world where the PM often says, you know, you shouldn't find yourself reacting to an event that you should see coming. And we could bet our bottom dollar that there's going to be, at some point, another pandemic. So to what extent have we built the digital resilience to be able to cope with that? And again, how have we made sure that we have done as much as we could for those lost, not years necessarily of learning, but the additional things that come with being in a school to help those children who would have been in school during that period? Chair, that's my final follow-up.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the question. With regard to the social aspect, I will ask the senior psychologist, Mrs. Juanita Brathwaite-Wharton, to speak to that. But in terms of the digital resilience, earlier I shared that we are disseminating devices to children, and that will be done using a phased approach. I will also share at this time that several of our schools are still using the Google platform. They're still using Google Classroom. They're posting homework on that platform. They're posting notes or what we call supplementary materials for our children so that they can do their studying. So in the event that we have another situation or another event like COVID, there is some resilience there. Is there room for improvement in terms of the use of the Google Classroom and so on? Yes, there is room for improvement, but the ministry will continue to work on that in terms of closing that particular gap. I will refer now to senior psychologist Juanita Brathwaite-Wharton.
Thank you, Minister Humphrey, for that question. Juanita Brathwaite-Wharton, Senior Psychologist, Student Support Services. The Ministry of Education endeavored during the period of COVID to enhance the services that we offer to students who would have been having challenges during that period. From the initial onset of the COVID period when we were all in lockdown, our social workers were busy at work. They continued to do home visits of students whom were identified even before COVID, who we knew were vulnerable. We continued to provide social work services where we did the home visits. We assisted in terms of food security by providing hampers. We partnered with places like Living Waters Foundation, with St. Mary's Church, with Kingdom Life Ministries, Assemblies, and we identified those students who needed that assistance, and we gave. Additionally, the Sandy Lane counseling program, during the online period, we continued online counseling for children who we knew were having challenges before, but also those who were referred by various partners in education during the time. We worked closely with all of the agencies, the Juvenile Liaison Scheme, the Child Care Board, the Welfare Department, the One Family Program. Many of those entities would have made children aware to us who were having challenges, and we continued our services like normal. Coming out of COVID, well, before we talk about coming out of COVID, as we anticipated the return of children to school, we created a mental health and wellness policy so that we could move towards those children who were having challenges quickly once they came back into school. We knew that many of the children had negative experiences, as you indicated before, with abuse and the challenge that families felt economically inevitably trickled down onto the children. And so we create a mental health and wellness policy that enable school practitioners to easily identify children who came back into the school setting who clearly needed an additional level of support. One of the things we also did through that policy is that we created the facility for self-referral of students. So in the past, our protocol was that teachers and principals identified children who they saw were in need, but we recognized that there were a lot of children who may have had needs that the school was not aware of. And so we instituted the self-referral process where children, both at primary and secondary, would engage with school counselors, with social workers, so that they could get the assistance that were needed. Because we were able to expand the number of social workers we had in that period, we moved from 2 to 9 in about 2021, and we also were able to expand the number of primary school counselors and secondary school counselors during that period. It meant that more children had access to individual counseling. I don't think people recognize we have guidance counselors in schools, but guidance counselors are on a teaching schedule. And so they teach health and family life education. They also manage the school meals program for children at secondary who have issues with having lunch. And so their time to do individual counseling is limited. So with the facility of the school counselors at secondary, we are able to provide that individual counseling to children because we recognize what we did in the past is refer them to other agencies wasn't working. We have them as a captive audience in the school setting, so it made sense to put counselors in schools who focus primarily on that individual counseling. We also do a lot of group counseling in areas where we see lots of children are having challenges: anger management, conflict resolution, bullying prevention, self-esteem training, and I could go on and on. But what I want to speak of specifically is the 2 flagship programs that we offer in schools, the STAR program, which is done for students identified at primary school who need an additional level of support. And that program, our primary school counselors and social workers come together, and we have created an indigenous social skills counseling program never before done in Barbados, where we looked at all of the areas that children need to improve their skills in order to help them manage better emotionally and behaviorally. And we created a workbook specifically done for Barbadian children with Barbadian sayings. We've utilized Barbadian songs. It takes a cognitive behavioral therapy kind of format. And having done some training with our Jamaican colleagues in cognitive behavior therapy, we thought that we wanted to do something that was specifically Barbadian for our children. So that's the flagship program at primary. At secondary, there's a program called Project Reach, where we identify first formers who come into secondary and whom school personnel recognize are having a bit of challenges transitioning. And we work with those children. We look at resilience, we look at empathy, we look at ambition, we look at confidence, we look at hope. And last summer, we actually engaged one of our members of parliament here, Ms. Tyra Trotman, who also presented to that program. It was very well received, and based on the assessments that we've done, those children have gone into second form and have mostly been able to settle well. That's a snapshot. I know that time is limited of the kind of work that we do in student
Not
services
limited.
to support children.
Go on.
Chair.
We can come back to you.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, I seek your indulgence.
Sure.
Chair, I seek your indulgence. I want to call on Andre Hines, who is the Manager of Information Systems, because we want to add to the point that in addition to providing devices, we had introduced a digital literacy curriculum in 2023 to make sure that our children are resilient. And I'm going to ask Andre Hines to talk very briefly about 2 more points with regard to what we're doing re-resilient. So, Mr. Hines?
Well, Mr. Hines comes, Chair, I just want to say, no question, but based on what I've heard so far, perhaps the ministry should consider, given the scale of this response and the nature of it, documenting in a formal way this as a lesson in resilience. And perhaps it would help Barbados in the future for future disruptions, but also other small states, because we may not always be the players in this space, but the response thus far is very heartwarming, but I fear that in Barbados we just do not write enough, and that perhaps is a way this should be documented formally and kept and shared for other people.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Honourable Member. And it goes to the question of ensuring that we can use Barbados as a model for what the future of education looks like anywhere in the world. Just one quick point before your indulgence, Chair, for Mr. Hines to take the floor. You raise a very valid point with respect to ensuring, and that comes to your documentation point. And I made a number of points which perhaps we must now settle within the ministry very quickly. One is the continued training of our teachers, for example, with respect to the use of technology and learning. Second of all, ensuring that capacity is constantly enhanced, but also monitored and tested. Because it's one thing to train, as you know, being a social scientist, but if you don't test it to see if it's relevant to the changes, then there's always going to be a gulf. And therefore, monitoring the delivery with respect to outcomes and looking to see, okay, we've made this intervention, how has it improved or not improved this outcome? And thus, there's that accountability, which is point 6 we have raised yesterday, so as to ensure in the system that we're constantly in a mode of seeing the progress. So, Andre. Mr.
Good
Hines,
morning.
please. Thank you.
Andre Hines, MIS Manager. To speak to your point, Honorable Minister, regarding the funds toward the improvement of technologies and so on, the digital literacy syllabus was developed in order to provide that kind of resilience for students. As you realize, coming out of COVID, we were asking children in primary school to check their email. And that is something that was very foreign to them. So we would have taken the steps to ensure that students would be able to work in a digital space. We are going to be using the funds, of course, not just improve the infrastructure, which would include the devices, but also the network infrastructure at the schools, the internet access, because we realize that students have to be immersed in the environment in order to better cope with the world ahead of them. And also, it's about the teachers as well, because we realized during COVID, yes, students were immersed in this digital space, but also teachers and parents. So we've also invested, or will be investing money to assist teachers as well, giving teachers devices so that they can work in digital spaces. And of course, that also creates opportunities for parents to learn as well, as students go home with their devices and they can start to interact with how to work in a digital space.
Thanks, Chair.
Honourable member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you all, City Minister, for your indulgence. As a member for the city, I just want to ask two simple questions. One, Wesley Hall Junior School, the state of affairs with respect to repairs thus far. And secondly, I sit on a committee that stakeholders, respectfully, teachers' unions, and other stakeholders, they complain of teachers' safety at the school plant. In fact, violence on teachers. Yesterday, you did mention about a total reform of the Education Act. And when you look at it, if a parent goes onto a school plant and assaults a teacher, the fine is only $500 and 6 months in prison. Huh? Or 6 months in prison. I'm wondering if, in your review of the Education Act, that we will look at this provision, which is a 1982 provision, in going forward, so we can strengthen that provision, really to make it, well, in terms of making a parent think second of going onto a school plant to interfere or assault a teacher. For example, making it having a deterrent effect. Those two questions I really want to ask, and of course to ask the ministry's position on it. And finally, in my other life, I recognize that a lot of 16-year-olds just out of school get charged for simple possession and even murder. I heard your team spoke about early intervention, and I'm beginning to wonder whether the early intervention methods, if they are aggressive enough, really to treat to these 16-year-olds and those coming through the school, because from my experience, when I interview them, my information is that they had a lot of clashes at the school, but they still went through the system and they end up in the criminal justice system. So I just want to hear your views on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, I want to thank you for grading City School.
All right, thank you, Honourable Member. Let me first treat to the issue. I'll invite my team at different points to intervene to the different questions. But firstly and frontally on the issue of the interventions in school, particularly with respect to deviance and deviant behavior and the manifestation of different things that we are seeing. It is the ministry's position, and we have been doing it, to ensure that our children one, have a safe space within school to function. Of course, our children manifest behaviors in many respects in ways that we don't want them to do. But there's also a broader societal issue that we as a country must confront. Yes, of course, the time spent in school is significant, but the ministry has been working with other agencies of state and also communities and non-governmental organizations so as to ensure that the behavior that is happening in our schools can improve. Two, and importantly, when you look at what is happening, there's a clear stance on violence in schools from the ministry and certainly the government, a zero tolerance. But what has to happen, or what has to continue to happen, is equally parents and families must also take a level of responsibility with respect to the behavior of their children or their ward. Yes, the school has a major role to play. They're, of course, with us between 8:30 to 4:30, depending on what activities there are. And whilst, of course, the ministry will work assiduously to make sure that there are programs and early interventions to treat to the behaviors of our students who are in the minority, first of all, acting in a deviant way. And my staff will treat to that. The message has to go out that parents have a responsibility to work with the ministry in ensuring that when their children come to school, that they are there to learn, they're there to study, they're there to gain an education. And the reason why I'm prefacing it this way in response to your question, a very relevant question, is that oftentimes there is a view that the government or the ministry can solve the problem of deviance in schools. And that cannot be the solution. And therefore, what is necessary, and I'm prepared as minister with responsibility for education, to talk with the country and the parents in particular, and the students, to ensure that they understand how do we navigate this space. Yes, there are interventions which my team will speak to, but it mustn't be the belief, not suggesting that that's what you're saying, but there mustn't be the belief that the Ministry of Education and the schools must now cure a lot of the deviant behavior that we're now seeing in society. But equally, we have a role to play. And I want to briefly invite the team to treat to that. But two, I'll also invite them to speak to the issue of Wesley Hall and to give you an update. I know, of course, that's in your area. And to say to you that we are happy on the progress that has taken place so far, and we will continue to ensure that that school is not just fit for purpose for teachers and students, but to also be a beacon, as I said, similar to what's happening at Wilkie Cumberbatch in the DPM's constituency, the future of what education will look like through continued refurbishments. So I invite the PS, one, to treat to the issue of Wesley Hall, but two, to call on the chief and her team to speak to the broader issue of deviance in our schools and what are the interventions that we've been making, but also what now needs to be done to close the gaps as well.
Good morning, Minister. Thanks for the question. Wesley Hall, work is progressing, as the Minister said, quite nicely, because at the end of the day, we want to, as I said yesterday, we don't just want to be tinkering with schools. We want to make sure that when the school plant, and it's not just the building, but the entire school plant is ready and is handed back over, is finished and is handed back over to the students and the staff. Staff being teachers and support staff, that the school is a welcoming environment and is a place that they're proud to go to each and every day. Wesley Hall School is a very old school in terms of years, and it's a school that many persons would have attended, a very popular school in the city area. And as the chief would have said yesterday, we want to make sure all of our schools are good schools in every way, And we are working to ensure that when it is handed back over to the staff and the students, that is welcoming, it's inviting, it has those resilient qualities. And because one of the things that, because we talked about yesterday, the plans, the drawing plans that we've done for the concept schools. And when we hand back over Wesley Hall, we're going to make sure that it has those features as well. When the chief would have met with the director of ETMU, looking at the plans, would have ensured that a quiet room is part of a feature of that school. A quiet room, because in our classrooms, we are being faced with children with different challenges, which means that we therefore need to make sure that our schools are well equipped to address the needs of children of all different types of needs. So within that school, there will now also be a quiet room so that teachers and the children will have that feature within the school. So I would ask the director of ETMU if he can speak a bit more in terms of the work that we are doing at the Wesley Hall School.
Good morning again. William Baker, Director, Education Technical Management Unit. Yes, you're correct in terms of the work that we've been doing there. When persons return to Wesley Hall School, the only thing that they might see that was there before were the four walls of the buildings. Everything else is essentially going to be new, a new layout for the school. What we have now in this new setup will be a dedicated staff room that was missing before. The ancillary staff, they also will now have their dedicated space as opposed to having to scotch in a corner as before. We as mentioned, the quiet room, we have a dedicated reading room, music room, art room, dedicated IT-related space, and we're also looking to create a new library for them. And one of the other things that will be happening is a new office for the principal. What was there before, the principal did not have a private space if he had to conduct meetings with either parents or staff. It was shared with other persons. So now what we have is a dedicated office which fit for the principal to allow him to conduct his business. So that's all part of what will be happening. And along with that, we'll be making sure that the entire grounds of the facility are up to scratch and really welcoming for the students and staff when they return.
With regard to the question that dealt with the Education Act, I will share with you that the Education Act is currently under review, and we have paid particular attention to Cap 41, Section 64, that deals with a person being guilty of an offense if they cause a disturbance, if they assault a teacher, if they behave in certain ways on the school compound. And at present, the fine for that is $500, only $500 maximum, right? Or 6 months imprisonment. As a ministry, we have engaged the Commissioner of Police and the Barbados Police Service, and I'm very grateful to them because they have been cooperating with us. We recognize that there are some parents who feel that they can go on the compound and behave any way that they want, but the Commissioner has shared with us, yes, that they will give us the assistance by enforcing that particular law. And the Ministry of Education Transformation has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to parents going on school compounds, or anybody for that matter, and behaving in that kind of disrespectful way. The schools are institutions of learning, and this is not only formal learning, but children watch the behaviors of teachers and parents and others, and we don't want that kind of behavior in our schools at all. As a result, within the Education Act, we have proposed that if a parent or anybody goes on the school compound and assaults a teacher or assaults a pupil or causes a disturbance, that instead of the $500, they will have to pay $5,000. That's the proposal. Of course, you have to meet with the unions and the parents and other stakeholders. We have to engage in a lot of discussion before it's finalized. but we wanted to put a sum there, a sum of money that will scare people so that when the police service comes and the person is charged, they know they have to look for some large amount of money to fork out and not just $500. So that is a very serious thing for us. We've paid particular attention to that. Now, you mentioned the fact also, Minister, that at 16 years old, you're seeing children being charged for this or being charged for that. And yes, we have been seeing that. But I want to take you through this process. The child is 16 years old now. It means that the child started school probably around 2015, and if they did early childhood, around 2012. Between 3 to 5 years old, that is the formation of the child, and this is why we are pushing universal pre-primary education, because we want to make sure that our children have a firm foundation in terms of the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills in order to be excellent. Thus the reason now for transformation, because at 16 years old, yes, you will try, you have the community trying to, the child is competing between the community and what is happening within the education system. We will continue to work with these children. But what I will say, we recognize that it is a problem. It could have been worse, though, if we did not have all of the interventions that we have had over the past 5 to 7 years. Because the number of interventions that we have had in terms of the psychosocial aspects, where the psychologists and the counselors and the social workers are trying to assist these children, that number has been very, very great. So we would have a lot more 16-year-olds committing these offenses had we not had these interventions. That is my take on it. But what I will say, as part of the education transformation agenda, we are trying to get to the root of the problem. And we have identified a 4-tiered system that can help us to do that. The Deputy Chief outlined yesterday the VIBE program, which is a school positive behavior management program, values-based, inclusive, behavioral excellence, and empowering learning environments, where the standards are made clear, the school itself helps the child to develop, and so on. So, setting the standards. We also have in draft the school code of conduct. There was a code of discipline before, but we're looking at a school code of conduct. So we're not only looking at discipline, but we're looking at rewards and recognition for our children and the roles and responsibilities of those who we entrust to take care of our children. So we are trying to be preventative first. Then, if that doesn't work, we'll have to look at in-school suspension. If somehow the in-school suspension isn't enough, we'll have to look at the out-of-school suspension. If that isn't enough, we'll have to then look at possibly a day school for the children, which we have in the form of the New Horizons Academy. And if that doesn't work, then we will have to look then at the next level, which is a residential. And you would have heard on the 12th of August, Minister Chad Blackman speak about the fact that the ministry is indeed looking at the building out of a residential facility. So there are a number of, we are using a strategic approach to deal with these matters. There are some people who are calling for the expansion of Edna Nichols and the expansion of New Horizons and the expansion. That is fixing, that is, to my mind, that is putting a plaster on what is not a sore. We have to get to the root of the problem. We have to try to prevent children from going to these institutions as opposed to just trying to expand these institutions at the end of the tier or at the top of the tier, right? So this is what this ministry has been working on for the past 3 to 5 years, and this is what we will continue to work on during the next financial year and moving into the next 5 years. Thank you.
Let me also intervene here again, Chair. Part and parcel of what we're doing with respect to ensuring that our students see the bigger picture of not just behavior, but understanding opportunity in life, is that for the first time coming September, we're having a situation where our students in secondary school must be involved in either a uniform activity, so a club, a service club, or a sporting team. And once it takes shape, the idea therefore is that you influence their behavior because one, there's structure. Our young people, irrespective of their background, their family circumstance, and pressures that come to bear, all have talents that we must now unleash and to shape them and to give them the opportunity. And that is why that intervention is so key, and that is one of the things that we are rolling out once again for the benefit of the country. All students in secondary schools will now have to be involved in either a uniform activity in our schools, a sporting club, or a service club, so as to ensure that we build the character and build the resilience that we're talking about in a structured way. And more often than not, as you can see, through our history, young people who have been in schools involved in activities with respect to, let's say, the cadets or in the football team or cricket or Kiwanis or whatever, key club, more often than not, these are the students who go on to excel. And therefore, once we therefore make it part of the co-curricular framework of school, the intention is to ensure that we can now see a reduction in that type of behavior. But I also want to say, Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown, you are certainly well placed to work with the ministry, given your capacity with responsibility for crime prevention. So I welcome the opportunity, continuing from the work that the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South would have started when he was in that chair.
Honourable Member for St. Michael Central.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. This question is really an extension of the question that the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown would have posed in relation to the safety in schools. But I'm focusing now more so on the tangible measures. So, for example, will there be an increase in security personnel? Will there be cameras? Will there be metal detectors? Because I remember when I was going to school, fights, altercations, it wasn't newer, it wasn't a stranger to us, but the difference is back then it would be fists, rocks, you had the occasional bat or hockey stick, but these days now students are actually going into schools with guns, knives, and other lethal weapons. So what tangible measures do you have in place to ensure that those items don't make it into the school compound? And then additionally, what about drugs? I'm being informed that some students are being used as pushers, where they're actually selling drugs on school compounds. So we're talking of the marijuana, but we're also speaking of the pills, like the Molly. And then there's some students that also ingest those items, and of course that will alter your state of mind. So what measures does the ministry have in place to tackle those two items?
Julia Beckles, Deputy Chief Education Officer. Good morning. Thank you for the question, Honourable Member. As it relates to the strategies that we have been employing, I can say to you that principals and their teams have been doing much to keep our schools safe. Searches, the use of searches, for example, and while this could be a contentious issue, it is extremely important because the Education Act, the framers of that act, recognize that there would be a need from time to time to ensure that students are not bringing into the compound weapons that obviously would compromise the safety. So I can say to you that our principals have stepped up searches in our schools. And these searches have been done at different times during the day. Many of them are done in the mornings, but they understand that there are some students who are very crafty, and even at the end of the day, you have to do some searches. So we have searches, and I can say to you that that particular measure has been reaping great results. The unfortunate thing, though, is that while students understand that they cannot bring the weapons onto the compounds, some of them have been stashing them elsewhere. Now, this is where, according to our minister, this is an all-of-country approach because our principals and their teams are doing their best to keep our schools safe. So while you are in school and you recognize that at any time there can be a search, that in itself is a deterrent. We also had to do some work as it relates to educating our students and their parents on the law. The honorable member for the city referenced the Education Act and the 64(1)(a), B, C, and D. We also had to speak to them about the whole business of search because there are parents who are of the view that children cannot be searched while they are in school. And I want to make it very clear that the Education Act does give every teacher, the leeway to do this, obviously under certain conditions. So there was the education of it as well. I think some parents were shocked that it actually exists and that some people thought that this was something new when we shared the information with our parents and guardians, as was the case when we shared the whole business of Section 64. There was an outcry because it was felt that we were now instituting this. And perhaps what we need to do more of is educating our public, our parents and our guardians about what actually is written in our Education Act, and our students as well. I can say to you that many of the fights in schools had their origin in social media. And students, a lot of them didn't understand that there's something called malicious communication, Section 14. And we actually asked principals to bring that to their attention, let them know that it is really an offense and you just can't go around. I mean, obviously you will say if people aren't fighting, then there's nothing to videotape. But we understood that there were fights that were planned or staged just so that you could have something to tape. So all of those are parameters. So education, that's a major one that our ministry is going to be embarking on. We have started, and we're going to do some more work in that regard. Because what is written in our act and in our regulations very often is not known to our parents, our guardians, and our students. And we have to let them know what is there. Of course, you asked about the metal detectors. We haven't gone there yet with the big walking detectors, but we do have ones. And bags can also be, you can also check bags to make sure that only books and things to do with education are actually coming through our gates. The other thing that we've done, we did have a session for our principals so that they could be upskilled in terms of seeing what is happening now with the packaging. You mentioned mollies and the other drugs, how they're being packaged now. They are very extremely creative. And we did have a mini, I would you call it, where a kind of a showcase so that principals could see what they look like. Of course, that is something that we have to do ever so often because once we are aware of the packaging will change. But that is also important for our principals because at least we have the leaders in the school having an idea as to what to look for, and they have also told the students to be on the lookout because sadly, there are adults who should know better, who are also around our school campuses trying their best to push these things at our children. So education all around, and I just want to again underscore the great work being done by our principals and their teams. I can tell you that as a result of their hard efforts, violence and violent acts in our schools with weapons, they're actually down. We want to get to the point where there are none. But I can report to the country that we've had reported last year, we had 12 12 such reports. At this point in time, we are at 2, and we are hoping that it will remain that way. The member for, the honorable member for the city spoke about violence on teachers. Today, we have 1 such case reported. Sadly, we don't want to hear of any at all because we don't expect that teachers or any member of staff will go to work and end up, having violence inflicted on them. But I can say to you that what we've seen in the past is that many of these things take place in term 1. And where we are right now, we are almost at the end of term 2, and we have seen a great reduction. Thank you.
Thank you. I did not hear a response in relation to the cameras because oftentimes we can't be everywhere at once. So I think cameras will be an effective tool to fill in those blind spots.
Yes, if I can come back to that one. Yes, we have had in schools some rolling out of the security cameras. Some schools which have had cameras before, they actually recognize that some of the cameras did not do exactly what they wanted to do, which would have been to take in those blind spots, and we've had a rollout of those. We also have in the newly installed, erected guard huts, we are also ensuring that there is the ability for the guards to be able to have the camera footage right there in the guard huts as well. So yes, that use of the technology is being rolled out as well. Thank you for that.
Let me also just intervene here, Chair, to the honorable member. You would have heard yesterday, and as being carried on the front page of one of our dailies, there is the school and safety policy, as it were, in which the ministry is ensuring that the framework with all the necessary stakeholders, police, parents, persons in technology, a wide array of stakeholders, because the issue of security and safety in schools is a very wide area. And there's no one entity, there's no one solution that can cure deficits that exist. And the ministry has recognized that that comprehensive approach is needed, hence why we've now embarked in that direction, so as to make sure that, first of all, there's safety at school for students and teachers. But to the broader question of ensuring, and I guess it's all linked to the issue of violence in schools, we have to continue with the zero tolerance, and the framework will go and take one part of it. But it is a broader issue of ensuring that we can treat to the issue of ensuring that deviance and deviant behavior is treated at source, whether it be at home, whether it be in the communities, whether it be in school. Because simply what pans out in our schools in many respects when it happens is as a result of things happening from outside of our institutions, but it plays out in our school. Yes, we have a duty to make sure that our schools are safe, but equally, I want the country to also understand that the Ministry of Education has to work with other stakeholders in curing these deficits where they exist.
Thank you. I was just informed that there are actually pens now that are vapes. So you look at it and it looks like a pen, but it's a vape. And similarly, there are knives as well, that if you pull the cover, it's a knife, but it looks like a pen. So I just thought that it might be useful to share that information so we can get that out there as well. Thank you.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favor, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 5 minutes past 12.
Question is that this honourable chair will be suspended until 5 minutes after 12. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Do you think yes, have it? This honourable chair stands suspended until 5 minutes after 12. This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension, we were debating the Appropriation Bill 2026. We returned to the Appropriation Bill 2026.
We resume our standing Finance Committee. Honorable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me congratulate the Ministry of Educational Transformation through my friend and Minister, Mr. Chad Blackman, for the work that you've done thus far in ensuring that our young people in this country receive what we think is the most valued and treasured aspect of their development, that's education. I specifically want to speak on schools, both plant and also I'll speak on to the estimates, page 378, sub-program 283, children at risk. And I heard a member for the city, he asked a question and I heard a very, very good answer with respect to the fact that education and dealing with violence and children at risk is not only done within the schools, but I look at your sub-program and I see that last year your revised estimates were 1.173 million for that children at risk, and that relates to the Edna Nichols Center, that's what I think. And then I see this year your budgeted estimate of 1.081 million. But I want to get a little more in-depth information on statistics as it relates to students who have left secondary school without certification or equivalent qualifications within the past 2 to 3 years. Feel free to share with me and the public and for the public and also for the lower chamber here, those statistics, because they're very important as it relates to those questions that were posed with respect to deviance and how we treat with at-risk children. So I would like the statistics to support what you have articulated in a very meaningful way this morning.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The situation where some of our students across the country leaving school without certification is one that certainly causes me and the ministry concern. Because of course the implication of that is wide. One, with respect to being able to navigate life thereafter in a world where certification is needed, whether it be for a job and to move on in life or to enter into a higher institution of learning. Two, being able to say that I have achieved X or Y. And three, the result therefore many times, not always, but many times young persons who have not had the qualification that you would expect them to have, oftentimes end up going into that deviancy that you referred to. And therefore, one of the things that the ministry has been doing and will continue to do is to ensure that we can tighten the systems to make sure that they are, in many respects, being able to get the qualification. But part and parcel of that problem, if I step back, goes back to what we spoke about yesterday at length, the issue of literacy. And therefore, hence what we're now looking to do to ensure both medium-term, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, is to give these students the opportunity to be able to read and to write and to enumerate and to navigate the education system even beyond school. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to make sure that not only that we close the gap, but that we can help those who have also gone outside of the system. And that is why also, with respect to our sister ministry, the training will be key for those who have not been able to receive certification. But in terms of the raw data, I want to invite our chief to speak to the specific aspect of that.
Thank you, Minister. Honorable Member, post-COVID, we have seen a decrease in the number of students leaving without certification. That number, or that percentage, went from 16% to 10%. I must say that the decrease that we are seeing, we believe, is linked to the interventions that we have been making with regard to ensuring that our students are exposed to technical and vocational subjects more and more. We have introduced also over the years more TVET areas for children to do, an alternative qualification or certification, the CVQs, City and Guilds. So we want to make sure that at the end of the basic education system, our children leave qualified. You heard over the past 2 days of us speak about the literacy program as well. We recognize that there are children at our secondary schools who can't read. And if they can't read, it means that they will not be able to pass the CXCs. So we're tackling that as well. So as Minister Chad Blackman said earlier, it is very multifaceted. We are trying to intervene at every level where we see a problem so that we can give our children the best opportunities when it comes to being successful after they have left school.
If I can also add to that, it is also one of the reasons why there's the revised curriculum, the transformation of the curriculum itself. Because as you go around to our schools, and even before I came into the ministry, a number of students have said, Honourable Member, that they always felt trapped in a curriculum or a system that doesn't cater necessarily to their skill sets and their interests. Yes, of course, there are foundational elements that every student must be able to navigate. Of course, English and mathematics, at least its basic core. But there are a lot of our young people who are incredibly creative. They're good at designs, they're good at fashion, they're good at music. And therefore, what you're now going to see in that rollout of the modernization of the curriculum, yes, in many respects, is still the traditional core areas that we've been accustomed to, but now placing even greater emphasis on the new areas of study so as to tap into that potential that these young people have. Because learning is not only, as you heard yesterday in my introduction, and my team reiterated it, it is not just only to focus on the traditional forms of academics. It is about helping them to navigate life, but giving them the skills to do so. So in fashion, in music, in the arts. You have, for example, the expansion now of the woodwork programs and the metalwork programs, so as to now capture the skill set that they are interested in, but towards ensuring that they can do so in an industrialized way, giving them the best tools and everything. So that is the approach that we've been taking. And when you look, therefore, for example, at the Barbados National Secondary Diploma, it will also focus on issues of numeracy, literacy, community service, of course, and a foreign language, so that our children are now then able to leave school with a certification that will allow for them to move beyond school. And therefore, that premise of what we teach and how we teach it is so critical to your question in helping to close that gap and to give every child the best possible chance of success during school and thereafter.
Thank you, Minister and team. Just as a comment to what was said, we saw the numbers move from 16% to 10%. And I heard the member for the city mention not seeking to diminish or disagree with anything that was said this morning, because I think the chief articulated the reasons for not having many more Edna Nichols centers and everything, what you're doing. But there's some out there who would argue while those numbers are dropping from 16 to 10%, we're still seeing more on the 16 being held with guns and being charged in this country. I once held that portfolio that the member for St. John, I think it has gone to the Prime Minister's office now with youth, where we looked at recidivism and the enrollment, the incarcerated, those who are incarcerated, and the under 35s and the under 25s, those numbers were very high. So while it's not only your responsibility, it's a holistic approach to solving these problems. Some will look to judge and say, hey, listen, look, those numbers have dropped from 16 to 10% of persons who are leaving school, secondary school without certification. But look at the numbers that are increasing with those who are leaving school and those who are at school that are being charged, the age 15s, age 16s. All right? I just wanted to make that known so that when you are articulating to the public that, as the member for St. Michael South said, we need to let the country know more what we are doing as a Ministry of Education and Transformation, and indeed it is wonderful work. But I move on, Mr. Chair, if you give me the little latitude, because this is my first time in the program. I moved to another school, and I want to ask a parochial question to the member, the project manager at the St. Luke's Brighton School.
Honourable member, you have to pose the question to the minister. The minister.
Yes, Minister. Sorry, probably because I know him so well, I was being too informal. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, question relates to the St. Luke's Brighton plant. Over the years, we have seen, over the past 3 to 4 years, if I stand corrected by the member, the Chief Education Officer for that area, but we've seen students, teachers leave the plant at St. Luke's Brighton on, I think, 3 occasions over the past 4 years, or 2 occasions over the past 3 years. Leave the plant, they go to the Draxar Resource Center, the Allerton Community Center, spend 6 months or 3 months, then they're back in the plant. And as recent as last year, they were out of the plant again and back to the Draxar Resource Center and the Allerton Community Center. And now they are back in the plant again. And as a technical person, it begs me to ask the question, is there a fundamental problem that needs to be addressed at that school? And if so, I would like, through you, Minister, to let me and also the people of St. George South know what are the challenges with the school. Because the parents, up to last night, I got a call from a parent, asked the question about St. Luke's Brighton Primary School. So just to share with the public, because the well of Parliament, as the Prime Minister would say, is not only for us in Parliament, but is for the public to know what is going on. And I know you have the answer, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Let me assure you and the good people of St. George South, and by extension the country, things at this school are now settled. I want to go on record as saying they're now settled. And not only do we have, of course, a spanking facility, but both on the pedagogical side and the quality of our infrastructure, both staff and students are comfortable. But at the same time, we are not going to rest on our laurels, and the ministry has a very deliberate strategy in ensuring that schools that historically, whether that be within the last year or 2 or even before, that have presented issues, we are paying keen attention through our technical management unit in the ministry to ensure that we are monitoring things at the school, so as to ensure that we're on the preventative side and not on the reactive side. But I want to invite Mr. Baker, who heads the ETMU, to take the floor.
Thank you, Minister. In response to the question at St. Luke's Brighton, as the PS has indicated before, we are no longer looking at piecemeal repairs. We are doing intensive work. So what would have happened on the last occasion when the staff and students who left the school, we undertook significant refurbishments at the school. And these would have included the upgrading of the principal's office, the staff room, bathrooms, the hall and classrooms were redecorated, external walls redecorated as well. The classroom floors were tiled, epoxy was applied to the hall floor. The nutrition room was completely refurbished. So we spent a lot of time and effort and money upgrading the facility. I think it might have suffered from a lack of maintenance before, and that would have been the problem. So I can tell you now that based on the work that has been undertaken, the student staff are there for the long haul. There's no reason for them to have to move again.
So I can rightfully say that there's no issue at St. Luke's Bryson with respect to the graveyard and the school proximity to the graveyard?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, my final question relates to St. Jude's Primary now. And while St. Jude's Primary is situated in the north, and my colleague for the north, I still have a vested interest because we can debate, it's just across the road, but I have more students from the south going to St. Jude's than from the north. But the plant is not in a very good state. And I visit the school, both of us, we visit the school pretty often. We are involved actively with that school, and I want to know what are the plans for that school. I heard through you, Minister Blackman, I heard it mentioned yesterday that is part of one of the programs to be upgraded. But I would like, again, for the public and those persons who are listening, to know what are the plans you have for St. Jude's Primary School.
Thank you, Honourable Member. So yes, that is part of one of the schools being done through the IDB project, the Skills for the Future, to ensure that we can modernize the school, make it attractive, make it clean, make it safe for all of the persons there and teachers and students. Now, therefore, work will be done this year so as to ensure that we bring it to that quality for the students and teachers. But I also want to invite Mr. Baker again to give you some more specifics so as to treat to your query.
Thank you, Minister. The St. Jude's Primary School forms part of the Skills for the Future project, which is funded by the IDB, and it will result, like our other schools, in improvement to facilities for the students and staff, exclusive of special education needs classroom, solar lighting, blinds for windows, zonal fans, padded corners, upgraded bathrooms, security, and ancillary facilities. So it will look completely different, again, when they return to the school. And any part of the school that is not addressed under the Skills for the Future project will be captured by the work of the Education Technical Management Unit. So when the students and staff return, it will be a completely upgraded facility as well.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, based on the response, I just want to ask a follow-up question, because the plant is a small plant. I should say a compact plant, not small, a compact plant. And you don't have much area for the students to play. They have to travel to greens. That's about, say, 3/4 of a mile to engage in recreational activity. Yes, you can stay on the hard court, but that's not all you want to do at St. Jude's. There's some lands, and I will want you, through you, Mr. Minister, to see how you can acquire some of the lands. I think this is property of the Crown, National Housing Corporation, to give those young children, aspiring politicians, aspiring sportsmen, the opportunity to play. And that is something I would want you to look into, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I give you and the good people of that community the assurance that my ministry will certainly be speaking to the Ministry of Housing, the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, so as to ensure that we can explore what is possible for the benefit of all concerned.
Thank you very much, and continue the good work, you and your team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon to the Minister and also the team at the Ministry of Education Transformation. My question is related to sub-program 307, which is the New Horizons Academy. I heard Dr. Archer Bradshaw allude to this facility earlier, but I want to seek further clarification. Now, the estimates indicate an increase of maybe over 400,000 or so over the last financial year in terms of the funds allocated to the academy. My understanding is that the New Horizons Academy caters to children with more serious issues than that of the Edna Nichols school, and therefore they may require additional support, more specialized support. But what I want to ask is, what is the main difference between the two facilities, and what is the plan not only to deal with these students, but also to protect the teachers who may be having some challenges who work at this facility?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I want to invite Ms. Kay Sargent to take the floor.
Honourable Member, my name is Kay Sargent, Senior Education Officer. Could you repeat the first part of your question? It was quite low there just now.
Okay, so I want to seek clarification on the main difference between the two facilities, which is the New Horizons Academy and the Edna Nichols School, and also what plans are in place to not only deal with the students, but to protect the teachers who work at these facilities.
Thank you. The Edna Nichols Center is what we call or refer to as an out-of-school suspension program. It is not a day school. Students who are suspended from secondary schools are referred there. The objective of that school really is to ensure that students who are out of school during their suspension have a place to go to keep them off the streets. There at that program, we address areas on which are dealt with in order to modify their behavior. For example, at the Edna Nichols Center, you would have counselors engaging in areas of conflict resolution, self-esteem, peer pressure, family planning, drug education programs, relationships and feelings. They can only attend the Edna Nichols Center for 10 days at a time. At that center, they will also be assessed. Students are referred for psychological evaluation or any of the other agencies which the team at the Edna Nichols Center deem would help the child. They work closely with the parents. They also feed back information to the secondary school once the children return back to school. So that's the Edna Nichols Center. It is an out-of-school suspension program. The New Horizons Academy is a school. It is a school for students with social-emotional difficulties who have been referred there from their secondary school. We begin, students can attend there from ages 11 and up, and they're referred there for students who are having significant challenges taking advantage of their secondary education. Students who go to the New Horizons Academy don't have to go there for the remainder of their secondary life. Once interventions are put in place and they see some results, meaning changing in behavior, they do have the opportunity to return back to the secondary school or another secondary school should they see fit. Now, the student population, I would report to you, over the last couple of years, we have seen a slight change in the profile of that student. Now, that school, I believe, is now in its 11th or 12th year, and over time, we have seen a different type of child attending New Horizons Academy. The same measures that we engage in terms of staff safety at the school, we do also engage in at New Horizons. So there are security measures that we have in place. There are times that students can get physically aggressive. We do engage in training of the teachers where they can best know how to de-escalate situations. And so there have been in recent times some concerns about issues like that. And through training, through protocols at the school, we are working to minimize the risk to members of staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I asked the question because I have been getting some feedback from my constituents about the need for additional reinforcement at the school. So my question, in light of the increase in the estimates, was specifically to ask if there would be a plan for additional reinforcements to protect teachers at the school. So perhaps you can shed some light on that, teachers and staff at the school.
Yes, thank you for the question. Definitely, we understand that teachers at these two institutions are operating in very risky environments. And so to ensure that they're comfortable to perform their functions, we would engage with them to determine specifically their needs in terms of making them feel as safe as possible. Right? But I will add here that we are very grateful, though, for the support from external agencies, because that support allows us to intervene in ways that the Ministry of Education Transformation could not intervene on its own. We have relationships with the Drug Education and Counseling, what we call DECs, the Probation Department, NCSA, the Youth Advance Corps, the Juvenile Liaison Scheme, the Barbados Family Planning Association. So while these children who are at risk go to the New Horizons or go to Edna Nichols, we have those supporting agencies lending assistance. We are also seeking to build out a program with the Barbados Defense Force across both of these institutions, because we recognize that discipline is something that we need to pay more attention to. We want our children, yes, we recognize, yes, some of them might be on drugs, some of them might be dealing with certain psychosocial challenges, but there's a need for them to understand time and place, you know, how to behave, how to keep themselves clean, because some of them are not being taught these things at home at all. Yes? So to your question, we will definitely be talking with the teachers and other support staff at these two institutions to see how we can make their spaces as safe and as comfortable as possible. Thank you.
On that point also, Honourable Member, I also want to give you and the country the assurance, amongst many of the schools, of course, but that is one of the schools on my list of touring. And actually not just seeing the plant, but seeing the operations and any concerns that teachers, for example, may have. Because as the Chief rightly said, safety, 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 safety is paramount. And we have made it very clear that our teachers across our institutions must be able to do their job that the country asks them to do in a safe environment and not having to feel in any way uncomfortable. So I want to give you and the country that assurance, taking a very practical approach and hands-on to see the operations and to see how things can be improved where necessary.
So thank you, Minister and Dr. Bradshaw as well, for your response. And my only admonition would be to hasten because it's an urgent situation, we want to continue to ensure the safety of our teachers and support staff at these various institutions. Thank you.
Honorable members, we want to wrap up this head. However, we have some honorable members that will have some further questions. We'll be asking you that we will give you the opportunity to do so, and we want you to be very crisp because we would want to close off this head prior to going to lunch. I will give you that opportunity in this order. Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair. A quick question. It is to do with the fact that, we've established that the birth rates are falling, numbers of children going into school falling, and the reality of the extent of the plant that exists. I'm asking this kind of as one of the MPs from the northern portion of the country. We have a lot of plant and small numbers of students. My question is, and like I said, I'm asking the question based on an assumption. That assumption is that the ministry would want children to be going to school close to where they live. What is the ministry's view or its intent in terms of trying to achieve that objective? That is, not having children from Pike Corner, for example, only wanting to go to Charles F. Broome or even All Saints. Is there anything in the ministry's plans? I know it can't be done by the ministry alone because these are multifaceted types of decisions that people make, but is there anything that the ministry is thinking about to address that matter so that more children go to the school in St. Clement's, Ignatius Bayer, Half Moon Fort in my constituency, Elliott Belgrave, as examples, rather than putting pressure on the transportation system, putting pressure on schools in St. Michael, where maybe their parents go to work.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The issue is one that certainly is receiving our focus and attention. And as a matter of fact, the issue of not just the allocation and role and number, and of course, persons choosing to go to schools well outside of their area has to be looked at. But we must also ask, how do we now ensure that we raise the standard of all of our schools to the point where a school outside of your area, particularly at the primary level, is not just seen as a school of choice, but all schools have that standard that gives that assurance. But I want to invite Deputy Education Officer Scott to walk you through what are the considerations before the ministry at this point in time to treat to the issue that you've raised.
Thank you, Minister. Stephen Scott, Deputy Chief Education Officer acting for Planning and Development. In terms of encouraging the students to be at those schools in those areas, one, as we proceed to the continuous assessment process, we do have the plan in place that we are going to encourage students and parents who would prefer to be within their particular area to make choices of those schools so that those students can be close to the area where they live. I do know that there are the secondary schools within those areas as well, who also look to have such students from those areas visiting the primary schools to encourage the choice of the secondary school in the area, and it makes better, as you said, for the transportation, so that we do not have the bottleneck in terms of coming to town or other areas, so that we have those children in that area. We are reviewing, looking at how we can upgrade those schools to ensure that what is offered there would be attractive to those students and the parents within that area. And we're also looking at the care, offering that care for students before school and after school, so that parents who may work in another area, they can be confident that the students would be safe and secure in terms of being at the schools, should they go off to work, and then they can return to collect them safely. So we are reviewing all of the schools and looking to put those programs in place to ensure that that occurs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll ask one question, and if the response is fulsome, I would not need any follow-up. Minister, I came across an interview that was done by the CEO of a 600 billion AI company. It was an interview with the CEO, and one of the things that they noted about this particular CEO, that she didn't study engineering, she didn't study sciences, she studied humanities, of all things. And what the article was looking at was the fact that as we move to this notion of AI, digital technology, etc., that the workplace is actually looking for skills that keep us more human. Even as AI replaces, all of those other technical skills, the article was suggesting, again, that there is a trend at that level, at the level of CEO and those that are leading, not to necessarily reflect the skills that we would assume that they need in order to progress. And it was a cause for reflection. And I want to ask this question: how many students do we have that are still taking CXCs in the areas of humanities, which would cover history, geography, English literature, the arts, those subjects that for many of us now, and I heard it certainly when I was going to school, they don't lead anywhere apparently at that particular time. Humanities and English literature, what we need English literature for? There's no jobs in English literature. How many students do we actually have still taking those? For me, what are the core subjects that teach us about human nuances, etc.?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'd invite the team to treat to the issue of the numbers, but I want to preface their response with the fact, and you are right, the world now requires, particularly in the context of jobs and business, persons who are also minded to solve human problems, creating solutions for human problems. And whether you have a business or you're part of a team, it is really about ensuring how do you create systems, how do you create solutions that will help humanity to advance and to have a better quality of life. And therefore, what you're also now seeing through education models around the world is to give that skill set. Because the truth is, technology is there to be an enabler and not to be the solution itself. It is there to amplify whatever solution comes before you. But it also treats to the issue with respect to what you mentioned, that they're now looking for persons, or they're preferring persons who have a skill set, more focusing on humanity, where we focus on the value system that we're now integrating through the education system. And therefore, of course, the skills and the attitudes, the values, and excellence. And once you can give our students that perspective, of understanding how do I interface with my fellow man? How do I have and embrace the value of empathy? It is something and a skill set that, in my view, notwithstanding the qualifications and certifications in other areas, it is the skill set that will be necessary to navigate the next 40, 50 years of our development. But I want to invite our team, Stephen Scott, Reverend Scott, to treat to the issue, particularly with respect to the percentage and portion of our students focusing on the humanities. And final to say, the traditional thinking and model, you are right, is that if you're gonna do English literature or any other area, there's no job in that. But to my mind, the value must not just be about the job that you can get in those areas, but how do you now pivot and use those subject areas to help us to look at the broader picture of how do we serve our fellow man through development, looking at it through a level of empathy, in areas of accessibility, inclusion, those key things that will help the country to move forward, particularly on the social development side, and not just on the productive sector side.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, in terms of the entries in the humanities subjects 2025 for CSEC, in Caribbean history, we had 433 students completing that subject. For English literature, we had 1,308 students completing that subject at CSEC 2025. For French, we had 362 students entered for that subject. For music, we had music general, we had 131 students entered. Geography, we had 800 students entered for geography. And I'm just going down to Spanish. We had 806 students entered. Social studies, 1,255 students entered. Theater arts, we had 157 students entered. Visual arts, 358 students entered for CSEC during the 2025 period. So we do have students entered for the humanities. It would not necessarily be at the level that we would want. And of course, in the new curriculum that we're looking at, we are looking at the orange economy. And therefore, that is going to be added to the new subjects in the curriculum as we roll that out in September 2026.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
We'll be brief. Minister, I must commend you and your team for a most thorough overview of the plans for this year. I just want to raise one thing. Is, I guess, following the highly publicized survey that was done some time ago, there seemed to have been a reluctance of the Ministry of Education to embark upon any surveys at all. And that has crippled a number of critical surveys. And this comes in following the issue raised by the member for St. Michael Central and some other persons in relation to drugs in school and whatnot. The NCSA is accustomed doing a survey to inform its policies in relation to drug treatment and early warning systems, so they can detect new and emerging drugs that are in use in Barbados. They have hit a sticking point with the Ministry of Education since the other survey that I spoke about. For obvious reasons, I'm just not going to call the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. While I note the reluctance, there are some institutions that depend on the feedback to be able to design programs for the said same students that fall under your remit. And I guess it is easy for you all to manage the content of those surveys, but is there going to be a change this year to allow the other governmental institutions and organizations to properly work with the Ministry of Education to get the information to you that may end up saving the lives of the same persons who are within your charge?
No, thank you, AG, for that. I want to assure you and the public, the broader public interest of ensuring that, as you said, the necessary information that will be used to help the system through the interventions, we will ensure that that is done. Of course, subject to the necessary frameworks and protocols, strictest frameworks and protocols, to first of all ensure the safety of our children, and to ensure that they're not put in any way that is jeopardized or causing harm, physical, mental, anything. But two, at the same time, balancing that with getting the content that is necessary to create and craft the necessary interventions. Because, as you would appreciate, without the relevant data, without the relevant information, we can't make well-informed interventions and strategies. So therefore, striking that balance whilst adhering to the strictest framework, which the chief, of course, has assured me, is also not just implemented, but being continued to be monitored so that we can have that buffer going forward is key. But I just want to invite the chief just to very briefly speak to where we're at with that regard.
Thank you, Minister. With regard to research, the ministry has established very clear protocols. We have created an education research committee comprising experts in research from within the Ministry of Education. If a person wants to conduct research using a survey instrument, that survey instrument is screened by the experts within the Ministry of Education through that Education Research Committee. Permission is then granted, and then the person therefore has to go to the principal and receive permission also. So the principal, there are several levels. The principal will also screen, or the principal and his or her team will screen. These protocols were not in place before because we took it for granted that persons will be ethical and that the instruments that were approved by the ministry or that are approved by the ministry will be used within the school. We can no longer take that for granted. So this is the reason we have this tiered approach. We recognize that there are some persons conducting research who may want to go directly to the school to conduct research. That will no longer be allowed. All research, all intention of doing research must come through the Ministry of Education transformation in order for it to be screened to ensure that the instruments that are being used, those surveys or observation schedules, whatever it is, those instruments that are being used will not cause any harm to our children. Another consideration is the Data Protection Act, and we had several meetings with the Data Protection Commissioner, and it has been made clear that there are certain types of information that will require parental consent. And we are able to screen those instruments to determine which ones will require parental consent. And we will give a letter to the person conducting the research to say that parental consent here is required before you can collect any data. And that letter, of course, has to be shown to the principal. So there are a number of protocols that we have put in place to ensure that we don't have a repeat of what occurred in 2022.
So I understand you entirely, and that's the theory of it. But the practical thing is that since then up to now, the National Council on Substance Abuse has been unable to get into the schools at any level or any school in order to conduct its research. And quite frankly, they need to know from the children Are you using drugs? What drugs are you using? This is not to call out a child, but this is so we know what is there and what programs can be specifically designed to address persons of the school age. So I hear you with the protocols, and I understand you have to put your protocols in place, but it must not be protocols that end up with a net result of 0 surveys, right? So I just want you to bear that in mind, that some are critical of immediate attention and swift action. I will tackle this in association with the Minister for Home Affairs otherwise, but I just want to be assured that in your plans for this year, it contemplates the reintroductions of some things that were brought to a halt. That's all.
Well, I thank you for your comment. What I will encourage you persons from the NCSA to do is to have a discussion. Well, you have to follow the protocols. The protocols are there to be followed. We can't overstep. So have a conversation with the Ministry of Education Transformation and let us see what can be done so that they can collect the data that is required. But we must follow the protocols as set out, and we must be very aligned with the Data Protection Act. We cannot overstep those. So once they do that, once the NCSA does that, then we will not have an issue at all.
I'm comfortable that I've brought it to your attention.
Thank you very much, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick one before we go to the break. I'm concerned with the level of truancy that I'm seeing in Barbados. When we were going to school, it was almost infrequent for students to be seen at bus stops on the road after 9 o'clock. So I want to know how far advanced are we with the dedicated school bus service. There are children within the constituency that I happen to represent who have to get up at 5 o'clock on mornings to leave areas like Kingfield and Erie Court. And then they don't get back home until after 7 or 8 o'clock because of the current bus service. And I know that the plans for the ministry that have been announced before were designed to alleviate those problems. But there's too much children on our streets at 9:30 and 10 o'clock on mornings at bus stops. They cannot be getting the instruction and the tuition that the schools are providing and the guidance that the schools are providing if they're at bus stops after 9 and 10 o'clock. It is a big problem and it needs to be addressed. So I want to hear from the ministry officials as to what plans they have in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. With regard to the dedicated school bus service, I'm happy to say that we have been in talks with Linda Holder, Transport Board, how we could get children to school on time. Over the past 3 years, we've had certain issues in certain places. That is, some children not getting buses on certain routes. But the relationship between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Transport and the Transport Board is such that once it is brought to their attention, they will seek to remedy. So we are at an advanced stage when it comes to the creation of a dedicated school bus service. We conducted a survey quite recently to determine those routes where children have issues. And we have shared those with Linda Holder from the Transport Board. So you'll be seeing that pretty soon in terms of the dedicated school bus service. I will now invite Sharon Weeks-Cumberbatch, who is the Senior School Attendance Officer, to speak about the truancy rates.
Good afternoon. Sharon Weeks, Cumberbatch, Senior School Attendance Officer. Can you repeat the question for me, Honorable Minister?
Just concerned about the high level of truancy that we're seeing in Barbados, especially the children at bus stops waiting long after 9 and 10 o'clock at morning, still on the way to school.
Well, within the School Attendance Department, we currently have an arrangement with the, Within the School Attendance Department, we currently have an arrangement with the Barbados Police Service with the intervention of a joint venture patrol, where every morning we are seen on the roads to assist in terms of those children who are seen loitering or truancy. We seek to ensure that those children are moved from on the road. Once we get the calls, and we then take ourselves to the places where those students are, because there are some hot spots where you will see more children than other areas. So our patrol would target those areas, and we would go and ensure that those students are moved from that area. We put those children inside of the vehicle as well. We are working with the Transport Board because we recognize too that there are some challenges within the terminal, with the service. Once those services are available, the students are expected to go on the buses to get to school. But sometimes we have challenges where students would leave the terminal once the service is available, and then they return after the service has gone. Then we have children, that would lead to children being on the road where you will see them like 10 o'clock or later. There's only one officer who is positioned in that terminal. One is in Princess Alice, and one would be in Granville Williams terminal. And the challenge is that the children come in different time groups. We say that they come in for different shifts. So when there's a 9 o'clock service, we will see like 5, 10 children there for that service. After that service has gone, we will see a drove of 20 children just come into the terminal just like that. And then we obviously have to communicate with transport, the supervisor on the job at the time, to ensure that we get a bus to move those children out. But outside of the terminal, then the joint venture patrol will assist in moving those children from the spots once reported to us. If we cannot get to those areas, I said we work with the Barbados Police Service, so the patrols that are on the road, we will communicate with them so that they can assist us in that regard as well.
Just to follow up though, but the problem is a little more chronic than that. And I understand that you have a limited amount of officers doing that role. But I mean, you can pass, say for example, Leicester, one secondary school, and see the teacher or the security guard with the late book, and 50 people in a line at 9:45 or 10 o'clock. They're now getting to school at 10 o'clock.
The factors are a lot. Students first have to get from where they live to the terminal or which other point so that they can get transport. And then from there, they have to get to school. And going into school now, there are some instances where students stop to get breakfast. So obviously, if they're taking breakfast, which is close to the school, then we have conversations, we try to have conversations with those proprietors in terms of the children coming at the time and telling them, well, it is time for the students to be at school. You have to help us to get these children into school. And then when they come to the school now, they have to get in a line, and then obviously there's a search going on, which obviously adds to the time, the lateness and everything in terms of the children getting into school. So it is not just one factor, it's a ripple effect happening with these students.
The challenge might be more cultural because, as I said, we never got to school late, or it wasn't at the level that is. So we have either become more lax or it's more tolerable now. I know there's a transportation system, but back in the days, you went to school where you were allocated on the marks you went. So my brother, we left St. Thomas and he went to Cordian Park. He took what people got to school early back then. So it is a bigger challenge now, and I think that you have to address your minds to it in a much different way.
It is cultural because some of the trends that we see every morning, it is a lot to deal with. Our children are engaging in practices that are not healthy on mornings, like with the drugs and all the different things in places. And again, we are working towards getting additional resources relative to officers because it would just be one officer in that particular spot. And we have to work then with the other officers from maybe transport board to assist us in helping to move those children. Even the citizens themselves would assist us in helping to move those children. But yes, the culture is very endemic, and that is a problem that we get every single morning.
All right, Chair, through you, in here as well, if you don't mind. Right, so we also have to think about accountability. Sometimes when you see children getting to school late, it has nothing to do with the school bus. It has to do sometimes with the fact that some children just feel that they can do whatever they want to. So we have to be able to hold parents accountable and children accountable as well. You spoke about when you were going to school, you used to get to school early, but I'm sure you had a parent that you know that if you got to school late, it's problems. You will be in trouble. You see? So what I'm saying here is I'm just reinforcing the 6th point that Minister made yesterday. He spoke about accountability, and we need to hold our parents accountable and the students themselves accountable. As part of the education transformation agenda, we spoke about making changes to the curriculum as well, to make learning more enjoyable, more relevant. Children can see the connections and so on. And we believe that once we're able to do that, children will be more interested in getting to school on time. We also spoke about social and emotional learning, and that being a thread that we are weaving through our curriculum. We want our children to be able to self-regulate, right? They have to know about, look, I want to get to school for 8:15, so it means that I cannot get up at 8:15, or I can't get up at 8 o'clock. I have to get up at 6 or 5:30 and start to prepare. These are the kinds of values, the kinds of attitudes that we want our students to have. But accountability is a very big part of it, and while we are responsible for the education system, we are very aware that children form part of a community, form part of a society. It just so happens that between 5 and 16, they're in school. And I also want to reiterate the fact that school is indeed a microcosm of society. It is a microcosm of society. So some of the ills that we see in society, we see playing out in schools. And while we will attempt to remedy the problems that we are seeing within the schools, we still have to hold everybody else accountable. It takes a village to raise a child. Thank you.
Honourable member for St. Michael South, we will have, this is the last member before I raise my question. Then, Minister, we will come back to you to wrap up before we take a break.
All right. Thanks, Chair. This will be very quick. I noticed in the estimates, there's, as I spoke yesterday, a lot of money is allocated to restructuring and fixing schools for infrastructure. What that means is that the students are sometimes displaced from one school to another. In my constituency, the students from Wilkie Cumberbatch are now at Bay Primary, or they were, or they are. And what I found when I visited the school and when I spoke to some of the teachers and some of the children is that we make provisions for the children to go there physically, but there's really no integration. I don't know how much thought is given toward integration because the children eat at a different time. They play at a different time, or they play in a different space. You get to go at a different time. And I'm just wondering, because I can see that there's going to be a lot of this displacement going forward, is there like a change management person who manages this area? Is there a standard to make sure that the children don't feel as if, obviously I'm from the Pine, I went to Wilkie Cumberbatch Primary, I have a vested interest in that school, but I represent Bay Primary, I have a vested interest in that school, and I'm sure, Minister, you have a vested interest in all these schools. So I'm just trying to figure out what are the plans and the policies when those things occur, because at Bay Primary, there are definitely two separate things happening there at the same time. I'm not so sure that's fair to the students.
No, thank you, Minister. What has to happen, certainly, because we can't have two tiers, has to be full integration. But I want to invite our Deputy Chief Education Officer Beckles to treat to the issue.
Deputy Chief Education Officer Julia Beckles. Thank you, Minister. What we did say to our parents when we relocated the schools was that as far as possible, we wanted to retain the integrity of the school that had been relocated, because that was a concern for the parents and guardians of the Wilkie Cumberbatch School. Their concern was, while we are going to be in Bay Primary, Luther Thorne, and we are going to be in Gradley Prescott, are we still going to be Wilkie Cumberbatch School? And we did our best to reassure them that that was indeed the point. However, we did say that the principals at their level could determine what they wanted to do together. And there have been some activities that they have done together. There have been some. But we left that up to them. And I do know, I'm not sure I know about what you speak, but I am sure that they have done some things together. As it relates to perhaps having the lunch at separate times, that had to do with the numbers and ensuring that they were able to cater to the students within the time that was allotted for lunch. But there are some things that they have done together. I do know that, for instance, assembly, sometimes they have had assemblies together. But again, we were very, very careful to treat to the whole issue of the school still being, having its own identity, because that was very concerning for parents and teachers of Wilkie Cumberbatch.
Chair, just to follow up, I understand that, but children do not respect these artificial lines. And I'm saying to you that at Bay Primary,